For 15 years, my family told me I was a killer. They put me in prison for a fire I didn't set, for a life I didn't take. They said I was a lost cause. Then I got out and found this one photograph. It proved my brother, their golden son, was the real culprit. And it proved my family didn't just let me take the fall, they built the cage themselves. I spent 15 years, 5,475 days, staring at concrete walls, learning the specific smell of institutional despair, all for a crime I didn't commit. The official story was that I, Caleb Rowe, the town's resident screw-up at 19, had torched the Beckett Sons hardware store in a drunken rage. The fire got out of control. Old Mr. Holloway, who lived in the apartment upstairs, never made it out. They called it arson and manslaughter. My brother Ethan, the family's golden boy, was the star witness. He testified with tears in his eyes that he tried to stop me, that I'd been blackout drunk and full of rage over some petty grievance. My own fucking brother. My parents, Arthur and Helen, stood by him. They looked at me with a unique blend of pity and shame. They paid for a lawyer, a cheap, overworked public defender, who told me the evidence was stacked against me. My fingerprints were on a gas can found nearby. Ethan's testimony was unshakable. Take the plea, Caleb, my father had said, his voice as hard as granite. It's the only way. Show remorse. Do the time. We can rebuild after. Rebuild what? A life I never even had the chance to start? I wasn't a saint back then. I drank too much, got into a few fights, and had a chip on my shoulder the size of a tombstone. I was an easy target, a believable villain. Ethan, on the other hand, was pre-med, handsome, charming. He was the future of the Rowe family. I was the regrettable past. So I took the plea. What choice did I have? Everyone I trusted had already convicted me. The day I got out, the world felt too big, too loud. The sky seemed impossibly high. My parole officer, a weary woman named Mrs. Keller, handed me the standard warnings and a list of conditions. Don't leave the state, find a job, stay out of trouble. My parents picked me up in a car that was too new, too clean. The ride home was silent. Not a comfortable silence, but the kind that screams. It was the silence of a tomb, full of things left unsaid, of truths buried so deep they'd begun to rot. They set me up in my old childhood bedroom. It was a museum of a life that no longer existed. Posters of bands I'd long forgotten were still on the walls, faded and curling at the edges. They'd kept it pristine, untouched, as if I were just away at college. A shrine to the son they had before he became a convicted killer. Ethan was there for my welcome home dinner. He was a surgeon now, married, with a kid on the way. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a blow. Good to have you back, little brother, he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. He looked older, lines of stress etched around his mouth that weren't there before. The guilt, I thought. He must feel guilty for not trying harder to save me from myself. Oh, the fucking irony. Dinner was a masterclass in denial. We talked about the weather, about Ethan's new position at the hospital, about the rising property taxes. Anything but the 15-year gaping wound sitting at the table. My mother kept piling food onto my plate as if she could fill the void inside me with mashed potatoes and gravy. You're so thin, Caleb, she'd murmur, her eyes darting away whenever I met her gaze. My father just drank his wine and offered platitudes about fresh starts. The past is the past, he declared, raising his glass. To the future. I couldn't stomach it. I excused myself, claiming I was tired. Back in my room, the walls felt like they were closing in. I was drowning in the polite, suffocating fiction my family had constructed. I needed to get out, but I had nowhere to go. Trapped again, just with softer walls. That's when I started tearing the room apart. Not in a rage, but with a cold, desperate need to erase the boy who used to live there. I ripped down the posters, pulled the books off the shelves. I was stuffing old clothes into a garbage bag when I found it. A shoebox tucked deep in the back of the closet, under a pile of old yearbooks. It was full of old photos and trinkets. And inside, at the very bottom, was a single, slightly scorched Polaroid. My blood went cold. The picture was of Ethan. He was 19, grinning, holding up a bottle of beer. It was taken the night of the fire. I knew because in the background, you could see the flashing lights of the first fire engine arriving at the scene, painting the trees in strobes of red and blue. We'd been at Miller's Pond drinking with some friends. That part of his story was true, but my eyes were locked on his wrist. He was wearing the family watch. It was a vintage Omega our grandfather had left to our father, who had promised it to Ethan when he graduated college. It was distinctive, with a dark blue face and a silver band. And I knew with a certainty that shook me to my very core that the watch had been reported as destroyed in the fire at Beckett Sons. I remember the trial testimony vividly. A firefighter had found the melted, mangled remains of a unique watch in the rubble near the point of origin. My father had identified it as his, claiming I must have stolen it from his dresser that night. It was a key piece of evidence, another nail in my coffin, painting me as a thief on top of everything else. It proved I was in the store. But here it was, on Ethan's wrist, miles away from the fire, at the exact time it was burning. The photograph wasn't just a picture. It was a lie made tangible. It was proof. The whole narrative, the whole 15 years of my life that had been stolen from me, started to unravel right there, in that dusty shoebox. My brother hadn't just failed to save me. He and my parents hadn't just stood by and let me take the fall. They had actively, meticulously built the cage that held me. They had handed the prosecution the tools to lock me away. My hands trembled as I stared at the photo. The air left my lungs. The quiet, polite fiction of the welcome home dinner shattered into a million sharp, jagged pieces. This wasn't about a screw-up kid paying his dues. This was a sacrifice. I had been the lamb they led to slaughter to protect their precious golden son. And for the first time in 15 years, the rage I felt wasn't the aimless, drunken anger they'd accused me of. It was cold, sharp, and focused. I had a target now, my own family. The first person I needed to see wasn't my brother or my parents. It was Maya. Maya Singh had been my girlfriend back then, the one person who had screamed my innocence until she was blue in the face. They'd all dismissed her as a lovesick girl in denial. After the conviction, her parents had sent her away to live with an aunt, and we'd lost touch. A quick search online told me she was back in town, running a small bookstore on Main Street. Walking into that store was like stepping into another world. It smelled of old paper and ink, a stark contrast to the sterile scent of prison. Maya was behind the counter, older of course, but instantly recognizable. The same dark, intelligent eyes that always seemed to see right through people's bullshit. When she saw me, her face went through a rapid series of emotions, shock, then caution, then a flicker of something I couldn't name. Maybe sadness. "Caleb," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Hey, Maya." It was awkward as hell. "What do you say to the woman you loved after 15 years of forced separation?" We made small talk for a few minutes, the air thick with everything we weren't saying. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled a scorched Polaroid from my pocket and laid it on the counter between us. "I found this last night," I said. She picked it up, her brow furrowing in confusion. Then her eyes widened. She looked from the photo to me, her breath catching in her throat. "The watch, the same one they found melted in the store," I finished for her. "The one they said I stole from my dad." Maya sank onto a stool behind the counter, her face pale. She didn't question it. She didn't doubt me. That one look was all the validation I needed. "Oh my God, Caleb," she whispered. "All this time." "They framed me, Maya," I said, the words tasting like poison. "My own family." She believed me instantly. It was the most profound relief I'd felt in a decade and a half. For years, I'd been in a world where my truth was a delusion. Now, sitting in this quiet bookstore, someone else saw it too. We weren't kids anymore. The naive trust was gone, replaced by a shared, hardened cynicism. She didn't offer easy comfort. She offered practical anger. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "I'm going to find out why." My investigation started at the public library, a place I hadn't set foot in since high school. I spent days hunched over a microfiche reader, the whirring of the machine a soundtrack to my descent into the past. I read every article about the fire, the investigation, the trial. I wasn't just looking for inconsistencies anymore. I was looking for the story underneath the story. The Beckett Sons hardware store wasn't just a local business. It was my father's biggest competitor. My dad owned Row Construction, a regional powerhouse that had been systematically buying out or running smaller local businesses into the ground for years. Beckett Sons was the last major holdout. The articles from that time painted old Mr. Beckett as a stubborn man who refused to sell, a David to my father's Goliath. Then I found something interesting. In the months leading up to the fire, Row Construction had been in financial trouble. A big housing development deal had fallen through, leaving them over-leveraged. The local business journal had run a small piece about it, speculating on the company's future. After the fire, which conveniently eliminated their primary competitor, Row Construction miraculously recovered. They secured a new line of credit and within a year had expanded into the next county. The motive wasn't just about getting rid of a rival, it was about survival. Next, I needed to talk to someone who wasn't family. Retired Fire Marshal Donovan was the man who led the initial arson investigation. He was old school, by the book. At the trial, he'd seemed so certain. I found him living in a small house by the lake, spending his days fishing and carving wooden birds. He was surprised to see me, to say the least. He stood on his porch, a half-finished wooden owl in his hand, his face a mask of suspicion. "Row," he grunted. "You got a lot of nerve showing your face here. I just want to ask you a few questions about the investigation, Mr. Donovan," I said, keeping my voice even. Things that never sat right with me. He was about to slam the door when I pulled out the Polaroid. "Like this," I said. "This is a photo of my brother, Ethan, taken the night of the fire. That's your first engine in the background. And that's the watch you found melted in the store." Donovan snatched the photo from my hand. He stared at it for a long time, his jaw working silently. He looked up at me, his old, sharp eyes, reassessing the man he'd helped put away. "I always thought something was off about that," he said slowly. "Your old man identified the remains, said it was his. We took his word for it. But the burn pattern, it was too complete, too neat, almost like it was placed there." He invited me inside. For the next 3 hours, we went over his old unofficial notes. Donovan was a man who trusted his gut, and his gut had been bothering him for 15 years. "Your brother's testimony was too polished," he said, "like he'd rehearsed it. And your parents, they seemed more interested in damage control than the fact their son was facing a murder charge." He told me about the pressure he'd been under from the DA's office to close the case quickly. A troubled kid, a grieving family, a dead man. It was a neat, tidy package. No one wanted to look too closely. The pieces were slotting into place, forming a picture so monstrous I could barely look at it. My family hadn't just covered for Ethan. They had orchestrated the entire deception. It was a corporate hit, a desperate move to save the family business, and it had gone horribly wrong. When it did, they needed a scapegoat. And there I was, the black sheep, already primed for the slaughter. The final piece of the puzzle came from Maya. She'd been doing some digging of her own, talking to old high school friends. She found out that in the months before the fire, Ethan had been in deep, not just with the family business, but personally. He'd racked up huge gambling debts with some very unsavory people. He was desperate enough to do something stupid, like try to burn a competitor's financial records to buy his father some breathing room and maybe skim something for himself. He wasn't just the golden boy, Caleb, Maya told me over coffee, her voice grim. He was a mess, just a different kind of mess than you were. Your parents were just better at hiding his. Armed with all of this, I knew it was time. I had to confront him. I found Ethan at the sterile, sprawling hospital where he played God every day. I waited for him in the doctor's parking garage, leaning against his polished black BMW. When he saw me, he flinched. The confident surgeon evaporated, and for a second, he was just a scared kid again. "What are you doing here, Caleb?" he asked, his voice tight. "You shouldn't be here." "We need to talk, Ethan," I said calmly. I didn't shout. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. My calmness seemed to unnerve him more than any threat could. "There's nothing to talk about. It's over. It's in the past." "Is it?" I held up my phone, showing him a picture of the Polaroid. Funny how the past has a way of not staying buried. His face went ashen. He looked around the empty garage, his composure cracking. "What do you want?" "I want to hear you say it." He tried to bluster, to deny it, but his heart wasn't in it. The lies were too old, too thin. I laid it all out for him. The financial trouble, the gambling debts, the watch. I told him about my conversation with Donovan. I watched the blood drain from his face with every sentence. Finally, he slumped against the car, his expensive suit looking like a costume. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," he whispered, his voice ragged. "It was just supposed to be a small fire, in the filing room, just to destroy the books, give Dad some leverage. I didn't know Holloway was there. I swear, Caleb, I never knew." The confession was pathetic, whimpering. He told me how he'd panicked and run to our parents, and how our father, the great Arthur Rowe, had come up with the plan. It was cold, calculated, and brilliant in its cruelty. They knew I'd been out drinking. They knew I had a record. It was so easy to just nudge the evidence in my direction. Plant the watch. Coach Ethan on his testimony. Convince a troubled kid he'd done something terrible in a blackout that he couldn't remember. "Why?" I asked, the single word hanging in the cold air. "Why me?" Ethan finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of a wretched mix of guilt and something uglier, resentment. "Because it was you or me," he said, his voice barely audible. "And Dad, Mom, they chose me. You were already a lost cause, Caleb. I was the one with the future. I was the good son." A lost cause, that's all I'd ever been to them. A faulty product to be discarded. "I was your brother," I said, the words feeling hollow. "I know," he sobbed, actual tears streaming down his face now. "And I've lived with it every single day." I almost felt pity for him. Almost. But then I thought of the 15 years, the cold floor of my cell, the faces of the other inmates, the endless, grinding hopelessness. My pity curdled into contempt. I hadn't started recording our conversation when I confronted him, but I did then. I pulled out my phone again, discreetly this time, and hit the record button. "You need to tell me again," I said, my voice hard as ice. "You need to tell me everything, from the beginning." And he did. He confessed everything, every sordid detail. His voice choked with self-pitying sobs. He recounted the entire conspiracy, implicating our parents in the cover-up and the framing. It was all there. My key to a prison of a different kind. The drive to my parents' house was the longest of my life. The recorded confession felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. Ethan had called them, of course. When I walked in, they were waiting for me in the living room, sitting side by side on the sofa like a pair of monarchs about to pass judgment. Their faces were pale but defiant. "Caleb," my father began, his voice attempting a tone of authority that no longer had any power over me. "Your brother is distraught. You're upsetting him, dragging up things that are better left buried." "Buried?" I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You buried me for 15 years. I didn't wait for them to spin another lie. I just played the recording. I put my phone on the coffee table and let Ethan's pathetic, sobbing confession fill the pristine, silent room. I watched their faces as their son's voice detailed their treachery. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a theatrical gesture of shock that didn't hide the cold calculation in her eyes. My father just stared at the phone, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. When it was over, the silence was deafening. "We did it to save this family," my mother finally said, her voice thin and brittle. "We did it to save your brother." "What about me?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Wasn't I your son, too?" My father stood up, his composure finally snapping. "Your brother had a future. He was in medical school. You, he said, pointing a trembling finger at me, were a disgrace. You were on a fast track to nowhere. We made a choice. A hard choice, yes, but the right one. We saved the son who was worth saving. There it was, the truth, stripped bare of all pretense. It wasn't just a cover-up. It was a value judgment, a cost-benefit analysis performed on their own children. And I was the acceptable loss. The cold, pragmatic cruelty of it was worse than any hatred. They felt no remorse, only the inconvenience of being caught. They weren't monsters. They were worse. They were accountants of human lives. And I had been written off as a bad debt. I picked up my phone. I looked at the three of them. My father, radiating impotent fury. My mother, her face a mask of tragic self-righteousness. And Ethan, who had just arrived and was standing in the doorway, a ghost at his own funeral. They had destroyed my life. And their justification was that my life simply hadn't been worth as much as his. I didn't scream. I didn't rage. I just felt a profound, chilling emptiness. The family I had, on some level, hoped to reconnect with didn't exist. It never had. I was standing in a room full of strangers who wore the faces of my parents and brother. I hope it was worth it, I said and walked out the door, leaving them standing in the ruins of the world they had built on my bones. I went straight to Maya's bookstore. It was late, but the lights were still on. She let me in without a word. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. I didn't have to tell her what happened. She could see it on my face. I just sank into a chair and played the recording for her. She listened to the whole thing, her expression hardening with every word. When it was finished, she just looked at me, her eyes full of a sorrow that mirrored my own. "What are you going to do now, Caleb?" she asked softly. I looked at the phone in my hand. It was the key to their destruction. I could go to the police, to the press. I could watch as the Rowe family name was dragged through the mud. I could watch my brother, the brilliant surgeon, get led away in handcuffs. I could watch my parents, the pillars of the community, face charges for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. I could have my revenge. But what would that give me? It wouldn't give me back the 15 years. It wouldn't erase the memories of the cell, the smell of disinfectant, the casual brutality. It wouldn't heal the wound they had carved into my soul. Justice felt like a hollow, academic concept. Revenge felt like drinking poison and waiting for them to die. I spent the next day in a fog. I drove out to the cemetery and stood before the simple, weathered gravestone of Mr. Holloway, the man who died in the fire, a man I'd been convicted of killing. I didn't know what to say to him. An apology felt meaningless. I wasn't the one who owed it. I just stood there for a long time, feeling the weight of it all. His stolen life, my stolen life, the sheer pointless waste of it all. That night I made my decision. I put the phone's memory card, along with a typewritten letter explaining everything, the Polaroid, Donovan's suspicions, the financial motives, into a padded envelope. I didn't put a return address. I mailed one copy to retired Fire Marshal Donovan and another to a reporter at the state's biggest newspaper, a woman known for her tenacious investigative work. I didn't want to be there for the fallout. I didn't want to see their faces on the news. I didn't want to be the tragic hero of a media circus. My role in their story was over. My role in my own was just beginning. I packed a small bag. Maya was waiting for me in her car outside my parents' house. I didn't go back inside. I just left my old life on the curb like a bag of trash. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as I got in. "I'm sure I can't stay here," I replied. As we drove out of town, I didn't look back. In the rearview mirror, I could see the glow of the streetlights shrinking, fading into the darkness. I wasn't driving toward a happy ending. There was no such thing for me. My past was a part of me now, a landscape of scars I would carry forever. But for the first time in my adult life, the road ahead was my own. There were no winners in this story. My family would be brought to justice, their perfect lives shattered. And I was free, but I was also broken. A ghost of a man trying to learn how to live again. But I was free. I had Maya beside me. And for now, that was enough. He chose to walk away and let justice take its course from a distance. But what would you have done? Would you have personally delivered the evidence to the police just to see the looks on their faces? Or is the quiet freedom of a new life the ultimate revenge? Let me know your choice in the comments.
Thanks for watching. If you got this far, leave a comment, like if you liked it, and follow for more.